Anthony Albanese's gross failure to act on anti-Semitism and his subsequent poor response to the Bondi massacre has been savaged by Australia's top law enforcement. And this is actually very scathing for Labor. Bondi could have been prevented, but thanks to what is being described as willful blindness, 15 families are grieving the loss of their loved ones who were murdered in the biggest terror attack on home soil in a deliberate targeting of Jews. A security insider has sensationally broken their silence in an opinion piece in The Australian called "Don't Swallow the Political Spin on Bondi Tragedy." Morgan D, an assumed name to protect their identity, is a high-ranking law enforcement professional with decades of frontline experience in Australia and overseas within the Australian Federal Police. They write today, "Government leaders now speak as though the terrorist attack at Bondi Beach came without warning, as if there were no signs, no escalating threats, no atmosphere of danger, as if it emerged from nowhere. And the repeated briefings, particularly to Foreign Minister Penny Wong and Home Affairs Minister Tony Burke from security agencies, all pointed to a growing and foreseeable threat." And then here is the real stinging line in that piece. There is a legal term for ignoring such warnings: willful blindness, when someone deliberately avoids knowing the truth so they can later claim ignorance. It is about accountability for choosing not to see what is in front of them. Willful blindness. And it was very clear from day one when Labor failed in its duty to crack down on anti-Semitism, instead delivered wishy-washy lines with no action.
I think it is always the right thing for Australia to urge restraint and the protection of civilian lives.
We condemn as a government any indiscriminate attacks and targeting of civilian infrastructure, including hospitals.
We have consistently said we wish to see de-escalation. We believe a wider regional conflict is not in the interests of any of the peoples of the region.
Whether Israeli or Palestinian, every innocent life matters.
Of course, what happened at the steps of the Sydney Opera House on October 9, 2023 should have been the number one warning. But Labor chose not to see what was in front of them because Muslim votes were more important than the safety of Jews and the safety for all of us, for that matter. And we know that willful blindness spiralled. Jews feared for their lives. Synagogues were firebombed. Businesses, schools and childcare centres were targeted. Hate was spewed. The Sydney Harbour Bridge was hijacked by protesters who chanted death to the IDF and waved flags of terror groups like Hamas. I could go on and on. But Penny Wong and Anthony Albanese were too preoccupied with recognising a Palestinian state and putting votes before values. Morgan D then went on to say, "A serious question now arises as to whether state and federal governments have misled the Australian public by selectively shaping communications about anti-Semitism and radical Islam for political purposes." Now, that is pretty scathing. Anthony Albanese had Gillian Siegel's special report into anti-Semitism sitting on his desk for 6 months and did nothing. And of course, he couldn't announce an anti-Semitism inquiry without one on Islamophobia. More than 3,000 Gazans were granted visas to be brought into this country with little to no security checks. Tony Burke even gave some a private meet and greet at Sydney Airport and then let in ISIS brides. I mean, this is a complete failure of our migration scheme, using it for politics. And on that, Morgan D says at the centre of this tragedy is the rise of radical Islamist extremism and violent anti-Semitism. Individuals who entered Australia, adopted or already held extremist ideologies and were known to national security agencies were nevertheless able to obtain a firearms licence and purchase weapons while not being citizens and while being monitored. The consequences of these failures will fall on law-abiding citizens who have done nothing wrong. It's not fair. It is not democratic. It is not Australian. It reflects government scrambling for cover because when you fail to act in the face of escalating anti-Semitism, radical Islamist extremism and hate speech, this is the outcome. And we know that Anthony Albanese's response to this crisis is straight out of the left's playbook, when leaders refuse to address the consequences of mass migration, to divert attention away from the real issue under the guise of multiculturalism and restricting our own freedoms to do so. Anthony Albanese has held 8 press conferences since the day after the attack on December 15 to today. Now, by my calculations, the term Islamic extremism and word Muslim were not mentioned once. Perversion of Islam is mentioned. Radical Islam is mentioned once. Guns, on the other hand, mentioned more than 11 times.
The terrible events at Bondi show that we do need more guns off our streets. The terrible events at Bondi show we need to get more guns off our streets. There is no reason why someone living in Bonnyrigg needs 6 heavy arms. There's no reason why someone in that situation needed that many guns. The very nature of our gun laws means that they are only as strong as the weakest link. And I want to conclude finally by saying that the government is prepared to take whatever action is necessary. Included in that is the need for tougher gun laws.
He's spoken about everything, but nothing. He wouldn't even go back to Bondi after having laid flowers in the morning after the attack. He wouldn't face his critics. He wouldn't speak to the hurt Jewish community out at the memorial. Compare that to former Prime Minister John Howard's leadership after the 1996 Port Arthur massacre, wearing a bulletproof vest while speaking to angry farmers over his monumental gun law reforms.
I'm sorry about that, but there is no other way. There is no other way.
Anthony Albanese's final blight on his own inaction, he won't even call a royal commission into the Bondi massacre, despite a growing list of eminent Australians imploring him to do so, including former Governor-General Peter Cosgrove, former High Court Chief Justice Robert French, former Intelligence Chief Nick Warner, former Treasurer Josh Frydenberg, Labor backbenchers Mike Freelander and Ed Husick, and now more than 170 silks, including a former Federal Court Chief Justice and judges. And now today, even the family of Lint Cafe victim Katrina Dawson, who said they were appalled after Anthony Albanese said there was no royal commission after that attack and used it as justification for not calling one in the wake of Bondi. Well, perhaps we now know why he won't. As Morgan D put it, willful blindness.